combined with a rich narrative and flexible gameplay, which is probably my favorite part about it, makes it a standout in the role-playing game genre. It's revolutionary, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I've never played, well, that's not true. I have played something like it, and it was the last game published by Larian Studios, Divinity 2 Original Sin, which I was trying to get everybody to play, but, you know, it was a little, it wasn't as accessible as Baldur's Gate 3. And, this game has taken everybody by storm. Everybody's talking about it. You have like 500 hours in it.
Yeah, I have an unhealthy amount of time into this game for some reason. It really is a remarkable game. It to me, it's a genre defining game.
Yep.
And like, you look at the images of it, and the playthrough's great. The graphics are wonderful. If you're okay with turn-based combat, it's a great thing. But it captures the mechanics of a tabletop D&D game, which is very difficult to do. And the variance of the game. I've done 2 full playthroughs now, and I have 5 short starts through Act 3. And I've yet to have the same thing happen twice in any story section.
Wow.
It's amazing that the game itself is that adaptive, and your choices matter. A lot of game systems tell you your choices matter, right? Well, normally it matters as to what your next cutscene is.
Mm-hmm.
This is something, and Larian's known for this, where your choices don't matter, but your choices have consequences.
Yep.
And you may make a choice in Act 1 that 30 hours later in Act 3 comes back and has a completely different effect on how the game goes, how people treat you, how the story goes. To sit down and to even come up with a mind map of how these different storylines go blows my mind.
I don't know how they did it.
Like, people are afraid of AI taking over the world. Whatever this game engine uses to come up with its story is more dangerous, I think, and more intelligent than any AI out there.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's really not much else to say. It's incredible. And in that description we read off, I think the flexible gameplay is really my favorite aspect of it. It feels like D&D. I love Dungeons and Dragons, and this is as close as you can get. And in some ways, I think it's better than actually playing D&D, because I think it onboards everything so much simpler, right? At least on console, your actions and everything you can do. When I'm playing D&D in real life, and I've got, even using the app or pen and paper, you kind of forget a lot of stuff you can do because there's so much information. But I think what Baldur's Gate 3 does so well is streamline that and make it so you really are considering everything you can do, even if it's just like shoving somebody off a cliff, which is like, you can end a boss fight by doing that if you pass the check. And it's like D&D in that regard, where a DM could spend 3 hours planning a boss encounter, and you walk up and you pass the first persuasion check and the fight's over. You don't even have to fight the guy.
I know that feeling.
But like, I don't know how to describe it. I think it's a game that everyone can play. Like, it is a little bit complicated, and it's definitely, you can tell it was meant for PC first.
Sure.
But I think they did a great job making it for console too. Like, I think it still works.
Well, and that's the one thing that's worth mentioning on PC is it was built for PC. And in fact, you have a completely different interface on PC, but if you fire up a game controller on the PC, it changes that game interface so it looks just like the console. So it's completely, that's another thing, that the fact that they went through and made 2 completely separate interfaces for how you were going to interact with the game, just that level of forethought was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you and I both play D&D. We both DM from time to time. This has changed the way that I play D&D.
Yep.
It's educated me on different character class information, all that stuff. But the fact that it shows you, you could sit down at a tabletop and roll dice and throw a fireball at somebody, and it kind of just rolls off your tongue and you move on to the next thing. You don't know what it looks like. And in here, not only do they visualize what spellcasting and combat looks like, they show it in different ways for different classes, and even, if you go with a bard, the bard can cast, any number of spells, but depending on the instrument that the bard is using, the visualization looks different and is custom to the instrument, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
It adds so much ambiance and so much life to the game. That's why I think this one should win.
Oh yeah.
Even if it
Yeah,
doesn't.
spoilers, folks. I think. Well, I don't think it's gonna. It's nominated for 8 things. First of all, I do not think it's gonna sweep. I think it will get most of them. But like it's up for like multiplayer game. I don't think it's gonna win that.
And the multiplayer aspect is terrible.
It's not great. I like that it's in there, and I want to do a playthrough with my friends whenever they get it.
Well, the multiplayer. All right, so multiplayer in as much as
multiple players,
4 people can be in the game.
Yeah, there are multiple players,
but they're all playing their own story essentially, and you can interact with their story to a certain amount. There's no instancing that happens here, right? So you don't have a shared experience. You go off and you have dialogue on your own that's relevant to your character, and you can share that with other people, but they can't participate in it.
Right.
It's not an MMO. It's a kind of a cooperative playthrough that you do most of the time, right? It's not even all the time. So it's not really a good multiplayer game. It's a great single player game that has some multiplayer capability.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that does shine in the multiplayer is the combat. I think because we played it very briefly, and that's the only experience I've had with the multiplayer was the hour that we probably played.
Right.
So I can't speak to it fully, but the combat in multiplayer is great because the combat is normally turn-based, and it still is in multiplayer, but it syncs up whoever the real players are. So if you and I were playing, our turns would happen simultaneously, but everything else is still turn-based.
Yeah.
So you can sync up abilities. There is a lot of potential there. We just didn't play enough of it to find out.
Well, and the one thing I will say that was great in multiplayer is as you play through your character's turn, you end your turn. In single player, if you end your turn prematurely, it's over.
Yep.
In multiplayer, if you end your turn, you have to confirm that you're ending it. That safety feature needs to be worked into the single player.
It is.
It is now?
You can, I turned it on because I kept accidentally ending my turn. You can toggle it so you have to hold triangle to end your turn.
At launch, that wasn't there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because I would end my turn accidentally all the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's got to be a setting for
all right,
this.
I have to go turn that all in the game now.
It's much better because there's been so many times where I've done it accidentally and like haven't even done an action. And then, I get beat up because I didn't do anything.
Right. The one thing I didn't like about the multiplayer, though, is as you play through the game, you pick up companions.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the rule is whoever talks to the companion gets them. And I can't hand that companion off to you so you can go do something else while I go do something else.
Especially when cutscenes can be triggered just by walking.
Proximity.
Yeah. So that's a little weird. But everything else is great.
Yeah.
I think I just get unlucky when it comes to these things, and I usually have technical bugs when other people don't. I have had some bugs with it, but considering everything that's going on, it's like a miracle. It's like it's from like on high. It was sent down, and it runs and it works. And if you think you can do something, you probably can. You feel so free, and I've never really played another game like that where there really are no. I mean, there are constraints, right? In terms of like you can't like clip through a wall or something,
right?
But like. I've never played another game where I go into a situation and I feel like I could handle it in almost infinite ways.
It's a game that is sophisticated well beyond its years.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't expect something with this level of intelligence to come out for 5 to 6 years.
Yep. We could probably do a whole episode on it, but we do have some other nominations to talk about.
We got 2 more to go through. Let's get rid of the rest of these.
So next up is Resident Evil 4, published by Capcom. This game is awesome. I played this game. I never played the original Resident Evil, so I was able to play this. This game rocks. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's like if you played through an action movie, like an 80s action movie. And it is scary. There were some parts where the volume had to go down and the lights had to come on. But overall, you have like a million guns. So you feel like you're in control. It's less of you're running from the monster, more like you're running to the monster to shoot it. Some highlights. This remake of the classic game has been praised for its impressive graphics, audio, and revamped gameplay mechanics, while retaining the core mechanics of the original and introducing new features and expanded content. Like I said, I never played the original, so I can't really speak to that. But I've played this game and finished it, and I absolutely loved it. I'm glad it got a nomination. I know some people are maybe a little bit perturbed by that because it's a remake, but if you play the game, it really is a remake. It is different from the original, and from what I've seen, it is its own game, and it stands on its own. I really think it does, and I highly recommend it if if you like action games, because it is more of an action game than it is a survival horror game. And if you like 80s movies, because it feels like that.
There you go.
Have you played any Resident Evil?
I played Resident Evil a long time ago on like a PS2 when it first came out, or if it goes back that far. Again, I don't like dark games.
Yeah.
So
that's Resident Evil.
Right. It's not one that I've ever really jumped on.
Yeah. In terms of where I think it ranks in terms of potential to win, I think it's probably towards the top. But I just, after talking about Baldur's Gate, I don't see how anything could beat that. We've got a little guest in the studio, a little lanternfly just flew in. So yeah, Resident Evil 4. And our final one here is Super Mario Wonder, published as well by Nintendo. I own this game, but I have yet to play it because I'm lending it to my girlfriend. But it looks cool. It looks cool.
The sacrifices we must make.
I know. Highlights. This game is celebrated for its control mechanics, animation, expressive characters, innovative level design, and dynamic audio. Is it? All right. Dynamic audio. I guess. It features new power-ups and a fresh visual design that breaks from the traditional Mario aesthetic. And that's really, so many people for years were asking for these 2D Mario games to get a visual not upgrade, but a visual change. And that's what we got in this game. I mean, this doesn't look like other Mario games, which is, I think, a big reason why it's such a standout. I'm looking forward to it. Game of the year, I don't know. This was a surprise for me, but I think it's because it's Mario and it's Nintendo, and I think there's just a level of industry praise that comes with that.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong with this looks suspiciously like a standard Mario platformer.
Well, yeah.
With really nice graphics.
It does look very pretty. They added a bunch of new power-ups and stuff. From what I've heard from people that have played it, it's not as... it didn't break the mold as much as people wanted it to. I think a lot of people were just hungry for a, just full send it, just do something different. Oh, he's on me now. I flicked him.
Now he's knocked out somewhere.
Sorry about that. But yeah, I think it wasn't quite the property shakeup people were looking for.
Well, I think it's funny that there was criticism leveled at Resident Evil for being a remake. How is this not a remake?
Well, it's not I mean, all the levels are unique. You'll probably still get the Mario 1-1 world that has in every Mario game, but all the levels are new. All the content is new. That trailer did not really do it justice, I don't think.
It didn't impress me, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. If there was one that I could be okay cutting from these nominations, it would probably be this. But again, I haven't played it. Maybe when I play it, I'll change my mind. But
fair enough.
Yeah. So those are your Game of the Year nominations. Tell us what you think should win in the comments down below. I think our vote is soundly Baldur's Gate.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we have some other quick things I want to round up here in this section because we've gone kind of long. It has been a banner year for gaming. A couple nominations, games I would like to highlight that didn't make Game of the Year nominations. Sea of Stars, highly recommend that if you like RPGs, that pixel style. That game is incredible. It's fantastic. Final Fantasy 16, Armored Core 6. These are all nominated in other categories, not Game of the Year. Starfield. Remember Starfield, everybody?
I have heard rumors of Starfield.
It's bad. I don't like it. I'll say it.
I heard it's got a really good engine for building Starship.
Yeah, I haven't done any of that.
That's what everyone seems to love about the game.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think since it's come out, it was praised pretty highly on release, but I think as people have been able to sit with it, I think it's somewhere in the middle of the pack, which is a disappointment, especially if you're an Xbox fan, because that was
supposed to be their game winner.
That was supposed to be their game winner, and it's nominated for one category, and it's probably not going to win.
What's that, for biggest game of the year?
RPG, I think, is what it's up for. But Baldur's Gate's in that category, so it's not going to win. Yeah, so Jeff Keighley, the guy that runs it, he's like the brains behind the operation. He said that even though, it's a great year for gaming, we did have to limit it to 6. Let's see. Do we want to cover these other categories, or are we short on time?
You can run through them real quick.
So we got best. These are some that I just wanted to highlight. Best performance. We have Ben Starr for Final Fantasy 16, Cameron Monaghan for Jedi Survivor. Have you played that yet?
No.
Yeah, he does a good job. It's fine.
I didn't really like the first ones.
Oh, that's right. You didn't. We've talked about that before. Idris Elba for Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, which...
What was that, an add-on for Cyberpunk?
Yes.
Really?
But it's also like a remake, kind of, because with Phantom Liberty came the Cyberpunk 2.0 update, which like changed the whole game and made it what it should have been at launch, which is impressive and deserves acclaim, but...
Not that steaming pile of crap that we got at launch.
I love Cyberpunk since day one. I
love driving around a city and seeing random piles of trash just fall from the sky. It was such a just delightful thing.
I've been a Cyberpunk diehard supporter since day one. Not a CD Projekt Red supporter because they lied a lot, but I don't know. People are saying it's back, and it's kind of wild that Idris Elba is in the game.
That is kind of that's the thing. If you have a terrible release for a game, sign a celebrity to the next version of the game.
I own this DLC, but I have yet to play it because when I was playing Cyberpunk, I'm playing through it to experience the 2.0 stuff, which is very impressive, and I highly recommend going back to it if you want. You can drive around the city.
Is it another 15 terabytes of a download?
Probably.
It took 3 days to download it.
I'm going to butcher this woman's name, but Melanie LeBird.
Sure, that looks good.
From Alan Wake 2, she plays, I think her name's Saga in it. She's the other main character that isn't Alan Wake. Neil Newbon, who is Asterion, right? In Baldur's Gate 3. People love that guy. He didn't survive in my playthrough very long.
Didn't survive in mine either.
So, but I know he's captured the internet's...
Turns out a stake through the heart really does kill a vampire.
Yeah, I pretty much instantly killed him. I think he's one of the front runners. And then my boy, Yuri Lowenthal for Marvel Spider-Man 2. He is the best, and I hope he wins. But that's who I'm pulling for. I love Yuri. He kind of does the same voice all the time, but man, is it good. He's like
the Nicolas Cage of voiceover.
So we'll see who wins that. Really quickly, best independent game. I just wanted to cover this because this is where the controversy is. Defined as for outstanding creative and technical achievement in a game made outside the traditional publisher system. Remember that. It's going to be important. So we've got Cocoon. Haven't played it. Want to. Viewfinder is really, really interesting. The concept of that game is, are you able to pull footage really quick for it if you can? Maybe?
I can try.
Because you got to see it. You have a camera, and when you take photos, you can then go into the photo, and it changes the layout of the level. And it's tough to describe, but once you see it, it will like blow your mind. So yeah, we're pulling up a trailer real quick. I played the demo for this. I haven't played the full game, but it is it's really, really remarkable. And again, it's one of those games where you wonder how it even runs. So yeah, here, check this out. So he just takes the picture
for our viewing audience.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, audio listeners. Look up a trailer of Viewfinder. It's very cool. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is one of the reasons why the indie category is so
This looks like something that should be in my Oculus Quest.
Yeah. Like, it's incredible how this like works. And like I said, it's hard to describe for audio listeners, but go check it out. And I think the demo is still available. And you'll pretty much get the gist of it. But yeah, it's one of those games where it's like, how is this even running? And how does this even work? So yeah, that's Viewfinder. Sea of Stars is also up for the indie category. I love that game. That probably is in my top 5 for game of the year, for my personal game of the year. It's incredible. Dredge, which I think is a spooky game. And then Dave the Diver, which I love. Dave the Diver, also a great game. Is it an indie game, though, is what people are wondering. Because Dave the Diver is developed by Mint Rocket, which is a small team. But Mint Rocket is owned by Nexon, which is a multi-billion-dollar gaming company. So people are wondering...
That sounds like the evil corporation from a Bond movie or something.
Yeah, it sounds like from RoboCop. So yeah, unfortunately, Dave the Diver is getting a lot of heat because of this. And the team at Mitt Romney, that's what I think I'm going to say. It is a small team, but they're getting all this heat because is it really an indie game? I don't know. What do you think? Because they had effectively a blank check to make this.
Well, and that's the thing is that you can have a small team, but when you're getting backed by a large corporation like that, and you've got the budget for it,
right,
and you don't have the pressures of being that struggling indie developer trying to find an outlet for it and someone to push it and market it, I think you very quickly get outside of that indie game realm.
Yeah. And I still highly recommend you go play Dave the Diver. It's you run a sushi bar, you're exploring, you're a diver. I don't know, it's hard to describe.
That sounds exciting.
It's very exciting. I would make you pull up the trailer, but that was really hard to do for the other game. So, but yeah, Dave the Diver is great, but I don't think it should be in the indie category. That being said, you should still go play it.
Okay. Well, I think that's probably it for this segment.
Yeah, I think we got everything we could out of that. Go play Baldur's Gate 3. When we come back, we're going to get into the bummer part of the show where we talk about industry layoffs. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Entertainment. Today we're talking gaming. We just got done covering the Game Award nominations, and now we're going to talk about industry layoffs.
Of course we're talking gaming because you're on the show.
That's right. I should wear like a gamer sweater or something.
Be Insights into Gaming when you're on.
Yeah, it would have like Mountain Dew in the intro. All right. So anyway, like I said at the top of the show, despite being lauded as one of the best years in gaming, the industry has been hit by massive layoffs at every level. At the time of writing, it's probably higher now. Around 6,000 people have been laid off in the gaming industry. There's a very helpful but depressing website called videogamelayoffs.com, and it's been tracking the numbers since the beginning of the year. It's just one of those stories you hear about every week if you're not covering, I'm not covering anything, I'm not a journalist, but if you're following gaming news, it's one of those things that you can't really ignore, especially this year. And I don't know anything about economics, but I feel like it's one of those things where when one company does it, there's a real chance of it starting a tidal wave of this, where it's like it doesn't make it okay, but from the company's point of view, it might have like, well, if everyone's doing it, we might as well just do it now to cut costs. What do you think?
Well, and I think what you run into really is when one company does it, there's a viable reason for doing it, and usually it's an economic reason, or it could be depending on what the industry, but we've seen layoffs across the board, regardless of industry, not just video games, and companies that are doing perfectly fine, companies that are doing record numbers, record profits are laying people off. The unfortunate reality is that record profits, in order to get record profits, you either have to bring in more income, bring in more revenue, increase your margin on what it's costing you to do things. And to do that, you cut costs, you cut labor.
Yeah.
And that's usually the first thing people cut. And when you've got games that are releasing and you don't have another game in the pipeline that requires that level of labor commitment, that's the first thing that gets cut when it comes to the software industry.
Yeah, and we're going to have a segment coming up where we get into more the nitty gritty on why these layoffs happen. But I just wanted to highlight some of the big examples of these layoffs. One of which is at Unity, the software developers. They let go around 900 people this year alone. Unity has been in some very, very hot water lately. I don't know if you've been following any of this. They changed its pricing structure this year and basically nuked their whole brand for no reason. Not for no reason. They wanted to make more money. But like, it was crazy.
So explain what Unity is and what their product is.
So Unity is an engine, right?
Yeah, it's a game engine.
Yeah, that you can develop your game using Unity.
So a lot of the popular games that are out today are built on this game engine.
Right.
And when a game developer uses this engine, they pay a licensing fee to Unity to use it. So for every copy of the game that's sold, a percentage of that revenue goes to Unity for their royalties for that. And that's what they overhauled.
Right. So this is from The Verge. Unity they said that beginning next year, they would implement a pay-per download pricing scheme that would charge developers a flat fee anytime a game using Unity software is installed. I think the keyword there is installed.
Yes.
Right?
Because you can't do demos at that point in time without paying Unity.
Right. And that is including installs that may not be legal
Right.
through pirating and things like that. Also, multiple installations of a game, like if you uninstall it and reinstall it.
Well, because what happens is every time you install a game, the Unity engine reaches out to the licensing server. So if you do demos of the game, if you have pirated downloads of the game, if you uninstall it and reinstall it, every time it goes out and hits that licensing server to confirm that it's a valid license, as opposed to what it was before was on sales. So every time you would sell the game, that would then go towards the licensing.
This is more from The Verge. The fees are further broken down depending on where a game is purchased, meaning that a game bought in the US, UK, and other standard markets is assessed a higher fee than when it's bought in emerging markets like India or China. So, like, I don't know what they were thinking when they did this. This made a ton of people angry. Many developers, publishers, and consumers completely disavowed Unity. People wanted to boycott the game or the engine itself. And you got to understand, Unity is like the number one. It's like Unity and Unreal are like the two engines that pretty much everyone uses for any kind of game development. I mean, Unity has tried to walk some of this stuff back, but I think a lot of the damage might already have been done. What do you think?
Well, and the thing is, the regional pricing that they're talking about is not unusual in any other industry. So in any other industry, talking manufacturing, for instance, you have tariffs on purchased goods. So, for instance, I have a friend of mine who lives down in Peru. For him to buy a graphics card that costs $2,000 up here, he's got to pay $3,000 for it because of the tariffs. So Unity's logic is, well, if there's regional pricing based on tariffs because of purchased goods, then we can do the same thing for licensing. Well, the problem you run into is they're the first ones that are doing this.
Yeah.
Nobody else does this because there's no tariff on licensing. There's a tariff on imports when you're talking about actual manufactured goods. So there's no impetus whatsoever for the reasoning behind what they're doing. That's why they're taking the heat for it. And as a result, they're losing a boatload of business in the process.
And that results in 900 people losing their jobs.
Exactly.
And, you know, should the CEO maybe have taken a pay cut instead of having to fire all these people? Maybe.
That's a very controversial philosophy a lot of rank and file workers have.
Yeah. Another company that I want to highlight is Embracer Group. They've been making all kinds of news in the last couple of years. They've been snatching up a lot of studios like Gearbox, who made Borderlands, and Crystal Dynamics, who you guys will probably know if you've played the new Lara Croft games. Embracer Group is sort of this conglomerate that's just been eating up studios.
Kind of like EA and all the other conglomerates out there.
Yeah. Except they're not doing it very well. They're now cleaning house. This is from IGN's Wesley Yin-Poole. Embracer Group has said it has laid off 904 people. That's about 5% of its workforce. Since its financial struggles beginning following the collapse of the $2 billion deal, reportedly with the Saudi government, funded company Savvy Games Groups. When this deal didn't go through, this was like insane because it like fell apart like the day before it was going to happen. And like the industry was like, what's going to happen now?
Right.
Turns out a bunch of people are going to get laid off. In a recent statement, Embracer said they wanted to become a, quote, stronger company, I guess. They're closing whole studios too that they own now. So Volition, who developed the Saints Row games, they got another stab at Saints Row and it failed critically and commercially. They shut the studio down. So yeah, Embracer is kind of just cutting swaths from their company now. And a lot of it has to do with that $2 billion deal that fell through.
And this is typical, corporate mentality is that they're interested in the bottom line.
Right.
And anytime you have a publicly traded company that has a board of directors and it has, stock owners, your fiduciary duty is to the stockholders. And you trust the people that are making these decisions, who aren't always they're business people, but they're not necessarily software or game industry people. And that's sort of where you get that dirty corporate feeling that people tend to get here, is that they're just looking at the bottom line and they're going to cut their losses. They're going to cut what they think are losses in order to make money. And it's not just software. Bob Iger's doing the same thing at Disney and killing Disney. You've got industries across the board that are doing this type of stuff. They see something that's not raking in money. They have a certain margin that they want to meet. And if you're not meeting that margin, then you're a casualty, ignoring the fact that a lot of times the game industry doesn't work the same way these other manufacturing or entertainment industries work. The return on investment tends to be a much longer timeline that the corporate world and the stock world does not want to wait for.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of giant corporate companies, Amazon Games also had some layoffs. They recently cut 180 jobs from their games department. This comes during the largest sweep of layoffs at Amazon as a whole, where we were talking about, industry-wide stuff, with nearly 27,000 jobs being cut in the last year. Now, we're talking about 6,000 layoffs in the gaming industry alone, 27,000 just from Amazon, just to put things in perspective.
But that's across the board in Amazon. That's
right.
Sales, manufacturing, warehousing, everything. And a lot of that for Amazon is not because they're losing money, because they're not.
No, we actually have record profits.
Right. A lot of that has to do with improvements in how their processes work. A lot of automation going in place. They've roboticized a number of their plants. So they've negated the need to have physical labor here. And you'll notice only 180 of those 27,000 jobs were in the game industry.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people they had in their game studios to begin with, though.
Right. Yeah. So Amazon's revenue is up 13%. Probably helped cutting 27,000 people that you don't have to pay anymore.
Looks good at the bottom line.
Yeah. Net income tripled to $9.9 billion. That's from CNBC's Ashley Kaput. That's a funny name. Sorry, Ashley. But yeah, so profits are up. And like you said, when the bottom line comes up, it's capitalism, baby. That's the way the news goes.
So despite the game industry experiencing one of its best years, over 6,000 people faced layoffs. How do you think these job losses at various levels are impacting the industry's morale and future prospects, especially in light of such a successful game release year?
I follow a lot of people that are in game development on Twitter and stuff, and I listen to a lot of gaming podcasts of people that are very close to people in the industry. It sucks. Turns out layoffs suck. I think it's really, really bad for morale. Because, I think a lot of people they grind and grind and grind and try to get into the industry, only for them to have a very high rate of getting laid off anyway. Especially when, like we talked about before, when a game ships, what happens now? And yeah, it's a great year for gaming, but it's tough to ignore all these layoffs. And if you were going into this industry, you're going to have to wonder, am I going to be the next one to get laid off if I even can get a job in the first place?
Yeah, it's when you see this type of thing happen across the board, it's tough when it's your own company and they're doing layoffs. My company did layoffs this year too, and
so did mine.
And it has an effect on morale, and it has an effect on the output. And I think a lot of time the corporate entities that make these decisions never really go out and do a proper impact analysis to see what level of productivity is going to be affected by people with decreased morale, because the idea is, if they don't perform, we'll just lay them off. Well, when people walk out the door, it's not a salary and benefits that's walking out the door that you can save money on. There's brain drain. There's tribal knowledge that walks out that door, that as a result, the people that are remaining, because the job still has to get done, and the people that are left to do that job are struggling now to do that job. So either it takes longer, the quality drops off, the volume drops off. And I think when corporate entities make these decisions, they don't always take that impact analysis into account.
Yeah, and speaking of quality, you just triggered something in my mind. This is a very small facet of this whole thing, but one of the sections that gets laid off a lot is quality testers. So that reflects in your game when your game doesn't work because you fired everybody that was going to test it. So I know EA fired a bunch of them lately. I think but again, it's one of those things where when your game's no longer in development, you have no need for these quality testers. But with games like Apex Legends, games that are live as a service that are continuously going in development, where do quality testers fall in that?
Well, and that's the thing. Having worked in the software industry for years, your ratio of testers to developers is usually 2 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And testing is always seen as the first area that gets cut.
Yep.
But what they don't realize is that you can't trust a developer to test their own code. They're too close to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you take a look at Larian Studios, right? So Larian Studios did their official release in October of Baldur's Gate 3. They've had 10 patches and 10 bug fix patches they put out, emergency bug fixes, and 3 or 4 major patch releases in that time. So the development doesn't stop when it goes out the door because it's never a finished product. You've got a lifetime of probably 4 or 5 years that you still have to support the product. So getting rid of the people once the game's out the door is probably short-sighted.
And within those 4 or 5 years, you're probably going to start development on your next game, especially with something like Baldur's Gate 3 that was insanely successful.
And by the time Baldur's Gate 3 comes out, by the time your premier game comes out, you've already got a pipeline that's full of schedules for what's next in line. And if you don't, then you might as well just shut your doors because given the time frame it takes, where you're looking at 4 or 5 years of development to put a decent game out. So if you don't already have something in the pipeline and something in the works when your current game comes out, you're going to go out of business.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, you get this a lot with movies too. You know, these things take so long to make and then it's out and then people immediately want more.
Right.
And I mean, that's just how it goes. But hopefully that keeps some people employed too. Those are our layoff discussion. In our next segment, we're going to talk more about the causes of it. I know you did a lot of research for this, so I'll probably let you take over for it. But yeah, layoffs are bad. Layoffs are bad, and it sucks.
Layoffs are bad. Don't do layoffs.
Layoffs suck if it happens to you. But we'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Entertainment, everybody. We're wrapping up the show today talking about the cause and the purpose of all these layoffs. So the trend of layoffs in the video game industry can be attributed to several factors, and understanding this is key to forecasting the trends during and its impact on the industry's future. And we go to our corporate shill, Joseph Whalen, for the layoff report.
Wow.
Why layoffs are a good thing. Go.
No, not why they're a good thing. What causes layoffs? So we already kind of touched on economic fluctuations. So the video game industry is not immune to the broader economic trends in the world. And economic downturns or market uncertainty can lead to budget cuts and staff reductions. And everyone knows where we are with inflation and how tight money is and everything's costing more money. So that's pretty obvious right there. We're also looking right now, and it's first time in the industry's history that we're in a post-pandemic period. So we're still looking at adjustments from that. COVID-19 pandemic led to a surge in gaming as people sought entertainment during the lockdowns. This surge may have led to overhiring or overexpansion in some companies. As the world returns to normalcy, demand may stabilize or decrease, leading to restructuring.
There's also, people now are like, there's the discussion of work from home. Well, why wouldn't I just always work from home if I can? Especially when it comes to game development. A lot of these folks packed up their work computers and brought them home to keep working on games during the pandemic as best they could. So now, there's a discussion of, do we even need to be going back into, in the work? And that's across all industries. If we can, can we just keep the work at home thing going? And then, that's more cost cutting because then you don't have to rent office space.
Absolutely. And a lot of companies are looking at that as a possibility. In fact, behind you is a permanent workstation that's been set up for my wife, Michelle, now, who works from home 2 days a week as a result of that.
Yep.
And they've saw what they can get out of it. So the other thing you look at is shifts in consumer behavior. Changes in gaming trends and consumer preferences can impact revenue streams. Companies may need to restructure to align with these shifts, leading to layoffs in departments that no longer align with new strategies. We also have technological changes. Advancement in technology can render certain skills or positions obsolete. As companies invest in automation and new tech, there may be a reduced need for certain roles. And then we get to the corporate shill side of things with financial management and strategic shifts.
Ugh.
So poor financial management or strategic pivots can necessitate cost-cutting measures, including layoffs, which is exactly what Unity ran into.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to make a buck, so they made a change in their strategic, product line there, and it came back to bite them.
It's a very nice way of saying we want to make as much money as possible all the time.
Absolutely. So tell us about what the actual impact of all this is on the video game industry.
Yeah, so there's innovation and competition. Layoffs can lead to a consolidation of talent, with larger companies absorbing experienced personnel. You got a little bit of that with Embracer. Now that they're all part of this conglomerate, maybe they're having some cross-studio development. This could foster innovation, but might also reduce competition if smaller companies struggle to compete, which is definitely true, especially when it comes to indie development, which is what we have next. As talented individuals leave larger companies, there might be, a surge in indie game development, which I think we talked about this before when we were talking about the Microsoft Blizzard thing, where
Yes.
it's like as more studios are bought up and part of large corporate structures,
Something has to fill that vacuum, and the indie companies step in to do that.
Exactly. There's, this can lead to more diverse and innovative gaming landscape, which I'm all for. Assuming, it's, I'm all for the creative side of things, as you can probably tell by this. It's tough to see, but maybe that is a silver lining.
Well, and the one advantage you get from the indie side of things is you don't get the corporate shield. You get idealism. You get companies that come in here with this idealistic view of, I'm going to make this for the fans. I'm going to listen to the fans, and I'm going to produce something for the fans. If it doesn't sell, then the corporate guys come in, they suck up the company, and then they move on. A lot of times, for the longest time, BioWare was of that philosophy of, you had a couple of regular guys there that wanted to make good games for people, and they did, until they sold their souls to EA and moved on.
We would all do it, let's be honest.
I would too. Hell, if I could get, a couple $1 million for this podcast, I'd sell it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, next episode we're gonna have McDonald's branding all around the place. Yeah, I highly recommend you play Sea of Stars because it is a very similar situation. I'm blanking on the name of the developers, but it's like that, where they made another game called The Messenger, but they all seem like very down to earth people. We have shifts in job roles. The industry may witness a shift in the types of roles that are in demand, with more emphasis on technologies like AI, VR, and cloud gaming. I don't know about VR. Are we done with VR?
I think VR is pretty much, although Apple wants to bring VR back, I think they're missing the boat.
They're going to make people spend like $10,000 for a headset.
So you can get freaky eyes on the outside of your headset.
Yeah. We talked about this already a little bit, but the impact on gaming quality and diversity. Layoffs can lead to reduced manpower, impacting quality. However, they can also force companies to focus on core competencies and produce higher quality titles, which is kind of what Sony's doing. They're spending and taking the time to have all these first party games that are, industry wide successes, commercially and critically, that sort of hold up the brand just by virtue of existing. And finally, employee well-being and industry reputation, which the gaming industry already has a pretty bad reputation in terms of like crunch culture, which is probably still happening. But I think it has been reduced because it was exposed a lot with how often a lot of these devs are crunching. And you hear stories from like 2005 of people pulling like 30-hour days. And it's like, oh my God, how did we let that happen? But hopefully that's a little bit better now.
And I've been on build teams, not for the gaming industry, but in the software industry, where we've put in 36, 48 hours straight to get a build out the door for, an artificial deadline that was set by a product manager because he made a promise to a customer. So it happens across the board.
Yeah. This might affect the ability to attract top talent in the future, which is true. That if your industry has a terrible reputation and fires people all the time, people probably don't want to work for you.
Amen to that.
So yeah, I mean, that pretty much sums everything up. That covers the layoffs. Of course, we started off pretty positively with the Game Awards.
So considering the influence of economic fluctuations on the video game industry, how do you think companies can better prepare for market uncertainties to avoid drastic measures like layoffs, especially given the industry's recent success?
I don't know. Maybe pay higher ups less, which is never going to happen, but it's a suggestion. I know everybody turns to what was his name? He was a Nintendo CEO, Iwata, I forget his name. But Nintendo, when the Wii U came out and like completely failed, he ended up taking a pay cut so they didn't have to lay people off. Now everybody looks to that like it was a miracle because it kind of was,
right?
And people don't, CEOs are never going to do that, but that would be nice if that was the alternative to laying people off. But it's not the way that capitalism goes, unfortunately.
See, and I think it has to be research and development. I think if you got enough irons in the fire, if you throw enough stuff against the wall, something's going to stick. And if you've got a couple of games that are in there, you can tell after 2 or 3 years of development if your game's going to be a success, because at that point in time, you've trotted out previews at a couple of game shows. You've had some industry experts take a look at it. You've got some play time with it, and people need to be more antiseptic, I'll say, in their judgment of their products. If you get to that point and the product isn't very good, you need to cut your ties to it and move on.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because you should look into the development cycle of Redfall. We covered that last time I hosted for a gaming show, but since that game's come out and like is awful, devs have come out and said that like they knew this game was going to fail, but they had to release it anyway because you had to put something out, and it was like sunk cost fallacy where we spent all this time. We probably should cancel this game and rework it, but higher ups need us to release something, so here's what you get.
Well, and going back to one of my old favorites, Star Wars: The Old Republic, same thing. They spent almost 10 years of development on that, 6 of which was trying to build their own game engine before they realized they couldn't, and they wound up using a 10-year-old game engine to basically reskin the entire game for it. And then they released it, and within the first 6 months, they lost 50% of their subscribers because the game just wasn't up to what it was supposed to be. At some point in time, you need to have the sense to pull the plug on it.
Yeah.
And if you can do that and you have other projects that are in the works that are under development, you shift your resources to something that's more promising.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll, with all these layoffs, and maybe somebody will learn something from it, hopefully.
Yep.
But yeah, so any final thoughts? I feel like we've covered a lot of this. We've shared our opinions.
We've beaten the horse quite well here.
Well, I guess that's going to wrap things up for today. Thank you so much for listening. Before we head out, we've got some more show plugs for you. If you haven't
But the
already,
first set wasn't enough.
I know the plug's so nice we do them twice. If you haven't already subscribed, what are you doing? Pause this. Go subscribe, come back, rewind it, play from the beginning. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, maybe Stitcher if it's still around, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Amazon, and of course, Pandora. If you have any comments or questions about today's show, email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We're on Twitter. Some people call it X, insights_things. Twitch. If you have Amazon Prime, that means you've got Twitch Prime, and we'd love to have that Prime sub over at twitch.tv/insightsintothings, where some of you may be watching us live stream right now. Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. Instagram at insightsintothings. And all of these links and so much more can be found on insightsintothings.com. That's going to wrap things up for today.
That's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe, everybody.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, episode 21. Is the Supreme Court broken? I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
How you doing today, Sam?
Doing okay. Excited. We're getting back into the flow. This is like our third episode in a couple months?
Something like that, yeah.
Back on a roll.
Yeah, well, at least now when we do plugs on our other shows, I don't have Madison saying, well, you're not quite monthly podcast. That you guys don't do monthly anymore. So at least now we're getting back into the flow of things. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not the Supreme Court is broken, with a series of landmark rulings from the Supreme Court, some of which were precedent-breaking, almost all in support of the current conservative agenda. Is the Supreme Court broken? Are 9 unelected justices, 3 of which were handpicked by probably the most controversial president in American history, dictating the direction of a government that is supposed to be a republic of the people? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing today on this episode of Insights into Tomorrow. But before we do that, I would like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video versions and audio versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're available on Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, any place you can get a podcast these days.
Rest in peace, Stitcher. They're shutting down.
Are they? I hadn't heard that. Oh, I got to take those off the list then.
Yeah.
Wow, they've been around a long time, too.
I used to use Stitcher, and then they changed their interface, and it was terrible, and then I stopped using Stitcher, and I think a lot of other people did, too.
Apparently a lot of other people did, too. You can also email us or reach out to us. Our email is comments@insightsintothings.com. We are on Twitter at insights_things, or you can get links to all those and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
Let's get into it.
Here we go. So our first topic comes from New York Times, and they tell us that the recent Supreme Court term concluded with a series of 6-3 decisions divided along partisan lines, with the court's 6 Republican appointees in the majority. Those rulings on affirmative action, student loans, and gay rights were reminiscent of the transformative conservative decisions issued last June on abortion, guns, religion, and climate change. Is the Supreme Court in crisis? And if so, how could it be fixed? Complaints by the Supreme Court have cropped up throughout American history, but they've taken on renewed urgency since President Biden's inauguration. In the past, some of these criticisms have come from the left, such as when Franklin Roosevelt threatened to, quote, pack the courts to protect New Deal legislation. Others emerged from the right, like anger aimed at the, quote, activist bench that decided Roe v. Wade in 1973. But more recently, Democrats, stung by the Republican Senate majority's refusal to hold hearings on President Barack Obama's nominee Merrick Garland in 2016 and its replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Coney Barrett just weeks before the 2020 presidential election, have reinvigorated calls for reform.
So is there a problem? Is there a problem with the nation's highest court? The appointment process has become more politicized than ever, like most things in this country, leading to dogmatic justices and a court whose legitimacy among the public could be in danger. In the past, it had not been the case that the public could look at these 9 people and see them projecting the ideological preferences of the political party that brought them to the bench. After Brown versus Board of Education, a case could be made that something changed in the American psyche. The idea that the court had, quote, final interpretive authority had been solidified in the public mind, and the, quote, perceived power of the Supreme Court in popular political culture vastly expanded. This shifted the debate to how to interpret the Constitution, which created an even bigger incentive for presidents to vet and select judicial candidates who would faithfully execute their agenda. So because of that, leaders began to choose nominees who were young enough to to influence decision-making for decades after that president had left office. So you're seeing, they'll appoint a judge, but even after they've left the office, we're still seeing the ramifications of that appointment years after the fact. One effect we have today are judicial amendments to the Constitution, which with no ready means to overturn them. Of course, short of Congress actually cooperating to add new amendments to the Constitution that the justices would have to consider, of course. So, we're looking at what all this means, right? These judges have a ton of power, and, with this 6-3 Republican majority, how is that affecting a lot of these decisions?
Yeah, and without going into a civics lesson here, the purpose of a 3-part government with an executive, a judicial, and a legislative branch was to have separation of power. Mm-hmm. And at no point in time when that form of government was created was the intent to have Congress actually writing laws. So the problem that we run into now is that because Congress can literally interpret what the Constitution says, they can tell you now what those laws are. So even if a law says one thing, the Supreme Court can come in and rule against how it's actually written. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that you hear a lot about in the news is your Second Amendment right to bear arms. Well, one of the things that a lot of people who talk about this subject fail to mention is that in the Constitution, it says the right to bear arms is tied directly to militia. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court simply interpreted that as to not be the case anymore. And they decided that everyone should be able to bear arms, whether you're with a militia. Now, if you look at the history of militias, local militias, which everyone remembers the Minutemen and all that stuff that were the militia, they were evolved through legislative processes into what is today the modern National Guard. So when we say militia today, that equivalent is National Guard. Now, you could make a case that says only the National Guard, who are citizen soldiers, should have the right to bear arms, and it would make sense. But the court didn't interpret it that way, and the court says everyone should have the ability to bear arms.
Right.
We're seeing this now, and one of the things that we're seeing now is that the decisions that are being made along partisan lines. And the entire concept of the Supreme Court is that they're supposed to be impartial. They're appointed. They're not elected. Mm-hmm. And they could be appointed by either party, of which parties themselves technically are unconstitutional, since there's no concept of political parties in the Constitution that you can make an argument for right there. But the problem that we're running into now is you've got people that are on the court that are not necessarily making impartial decisions from what people are saying. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of tough to watch, honestly. Especially when you think about how you would like things to work we're not necessarily a straight up democracy. We're a republic or a democratic republic, right?
Federal republic.
Yeah. But in a certain extent, you would want the will of the people to be reflected by the people that are leading us. And I don't really think that's the case necessarily, especially when we are going to look at a lot of these rulings today. A lot of people don't agree with these rulings, but there really is nothing we can do about it because they're the Supreme Court and they hold all the power when it comes to these things. And especially when you've got the conservative majority, obviously a conservative agenda is going to be more pushed, than the other side of things. And there's just no getting around that.
Well, and the one point the article makes is that the only thing that Congress can do to take back the power that the people elected into them would be to come up with amendments to the Constitution. So the Supreme Court would then have to consider these amendments. Of course, they could rule any way they wanted on those amendments. But the problem you run into now is that the political environment is so contested, there's no way you're going to get both Republicans and Democrats to agree enough to get any kind of amendment passed. And to be honest with you, with the politicians we have today, I think the last thing this country needs is people starting to write amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
So how do we get that power back into the hands of the people?
Oh, you're asking me? I have no idea. I legitimately have no idea because, like we talked about, these folks aren't elected; they're appointed. So I guess it would be voting for the political candidates that you think would appoint the judges you want. But even then, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. I don't know if there's a legal way to to contest it. I don't think there is. Right? It's the Supreme Court. I mean, you always go to that higher power. The highest power for law is the Supreme Court, right? So maybe at the state level.
Theoretically, the only thing that really could be done would be what the Republicans were concerned the Biden administration was going to do, and that is pack the courts. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing constitutionally that says the court is limited to 9 justices. We've had more in the past. So the president could call for the expansion of the Supreme Court, add, say, 3 additional people to the Supreme Court, appoint 3 Democrats, so you'd have
6 and 6.
6 and 6 at that point in time, and try to bring some balance back to it. That's feasible, and that's something that's well within his power, but the punishment of the attacks that he would get for packing the court like that from the Republicans, he'll be impeached within a week once he even mentions that.
But wouldn't you want it to be balanced? Is that not, wouldn't you want enough?
I would, as a citizen, I would.
But I guess if you want...
As a Republican,
right.
You don't when you have the power.
Yeah.
Because, if you look at history, whenever government power has been balanced, where the executive is one party and the legislature is another party,
nothing gets done.
Nothing gets done.
Yeah.
And really, that's really the best scenario that we have at this point in time is gridlock. Because if neither side can get anything done, they can't screw things up any more than they already have.
Yep. Or further assert their own agenda and get more power for themselves.
That's it. And the problem that you have right now is that when you can appoint members to the Supreme Court that will carry out your agenda and not be impartial, that is packing the court, really.
Right.
And they did exactly that under Trump, where they rushed through the last appointment after Ginsburg died.
Yep.
And had she held out, and I don't mean to make light of this, but had she held out, because I think she was in a state of coma at the time, and they had just kept her on life support, they couldn't have filled that seat until after the election. And you would have had a more balanced, it still would have been imbalanced, but you would have had a more balanced court at that time. So yeah. I think the problem we have is the process by which justices are appointed is now ripe with corruption, and it has become a political process. And I think that the integrity of the Supreme Court has deteriorated to the point that you've got Supreme Court justices now that are under investigation for corruption themselves, where you've got Clarence Thomas, who's under investigation for taking undeclared presents or undeclared gifts, basically bribes,
right,
from a very prominent, very well-known Republican supporter that he was supposed to declare and didn't. And when you've got that kind of suspicion on your Supreme Court, it's really hard to take them seriously as being a Supreme Court at that point.
Yeah, because ideally, at the end of the day, we all know politicians are corrupt, right? I mean, everybody knows that. But ideally, you would want the last line of defense to be the Supreme Court, to be impartial, to be the one thing you can count on to kind of right the ship. But that is not the case anymore, and maybe it hasn't been for a while.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that's the problem we're at. That's the situation we're in now, where they were always the sanity check. They were always the ones that came in impartially. Not always. I mean, there was partiality in there for years, but they were the element of government that would come in that were the babysitters that would, push the two sides apart and say, all right, let's look at this. Let's look at what's legally precedent. Let's look at what's best for the country, and let's do the right thing. And you're just not getting that referee from them now.
Yep.
So I think we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the more impactful decisions from the most recent term of the court. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. Today we are discussing the Supreme Court and some of their recent decisions. So the first thing we're going to cover is the ruling on affirmative action. The Supreme Court effectively gutted affirmative action, ending race-conscious admissions. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court recently, like we just said, ended race-conscious admission programs in colleges and universities across the country. In a decision divided along ideological lines, the 6 conservative justices, supermajority, that's a cool word, maybe not in practice, but it's a cool word, invalidated admission programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow Supreme Court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It also ends the ability of colleges and universities, public and private, to do what most say they still need to do, and that's consider race as one of the many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants is to be admitted. So that's the first thing we're covering. This is a pretty big deal, especially for those that are affected by it. And it was really that public and private thing that I really latched onto, that it's everywhere. You think of the big schools, like it mentions Harvard and North Carolina, but this is going to affect a lot more than just them.
Yeah, and there's, with all things, there's 2 sides to every story here. And really what we're looking at here is you've got one side that basically says that you can't, by bringing race in and giving preferential treatment to one race over another is discrimination. So you can't do that. When the point of doing that was because discrimination existed already.
Right.
And you were getting preferential treatment to one race over another. So they legislatively forced you to, if not change that practice, then to at least adhere to certain percentages, certain quotas that you had to have. And the problem that you run into here is that you're saying, okay, let's do it away with discrimination administratively. Well, in a perfect world, that works. You can do that. but we don't live in a perfect world, because when you do away with administrative discrimination, you still have endemic
Societal
societal discrimination that's going to take over in that place.
And that's kind of the thing, that when people argue that, they argue the first point that you said of, oh, well, it's discriminatory to have affirmative action. But then people forget that like racism exists. And like,
Right.
that's why it had to be like forced in the first place, is because if we make it laissez-faire, it doesn't work. It's not equal, and it needs to be mandated to make it. Well, I guess it's not equal, but you know what I mean. To give those people the opportunity that they otherwise probably would not be afforded, and now will not be afforded.
Well, and I think that was what the original point of this legislation was. It was to force you to make it even. But in trying to get to that point, you simply instituted a different form of discrimination. So you're treating the symptom, not the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem really is the discrimination. And until human beings can evolve to the point that they don't discriminate, you're not gonna have that happy balance. And that's kind of what the majority have argued. The 6-3 majority, conservative majority in the court, argued, quote, many universities have for too long concluded, wrongly, that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Now, I take exception to that one to begin with there, because our Constitution declares that all men are created equal. And when it was written, they knew all men weren't created equal, because also in the Constitution, 3/5, every African American who was in the country was counted as 3/5 of a person. So the hypocrisy in the Constitution itself tells me that we don't have a constitutional history that says this is intolerant.
Yeah.
As he has done before, Justice Thomas, the second black justice appointed to the court, reiterated his long-held view that affirmative action imposes a stigma on minorities. Now, this I think he has a point with. I don't think the way he puts it here has a point. He says, quote, while I'm painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, I hold our enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles that all men are created equal, all equal citizens, and all must be treated equally before the law. Now, I think he's smart enough to know that that's not how the world is right now.
No,
The fact that he makes a statement like this is naive, and it's insulting, really, that he would make this
it puts
statement.
the ball in our court of like, hey, man, we got rid of it. You guys got to be better.
Right.
It's like, no, the Supreme Court exists to do that. It is your job, and more so part than like every citizen, to uphold these values and to fight for this kind of equality that you're talking about here. But you're not doing that. You're doing the opposite of that. And then you're basically washing your hands of it and saying, well, hey, we live in a society. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Now, to Thomas's point, I can understand the rationale that by holding African Americans to a lower standard, that you're imposing a stigma on them. And really, if it was me, I would be insulted. So really what we're talking about here is, if you have two people who are one white, one black, they both apply for school, you have to take, under normal circumstances, you would take the person who's the most qualified, and that qualification would be equally measured. But instead, what we're talking about here is somebody who may need a 3.5 grade point average if they were Caucasian to get in, an African American may only need a 3.25. And Thomas's point is, by holding them to that lower standard, you're basically telling them that they're not good enough. So there's a logic to it, but the way that he uses that logic is so distorted and so tone deaf to the spirit of this legislation, because what's happening is, in reality, you're saying, reality is saying, if the Caucasian has a 3.5 and the African American has a 3.5, we're going to let the Caucasian guy in because he's not black. And that's what reality is.
Yeah.
And Thomas fails to address that with his stigma argument. So Chief Justice Roberts goes on, and for his part, pointed out the court's 2003 decision reaffirming the constitutionality of affirmative action programs, noting that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing for the court at the time, had suggested that there would have to be an end at some point in the future. And Roberts declares that time is now. And I think the problem is, it hasn't. Human beings...
It's only gotten worse.
Not even human beings. Americans have not gotten to the point that they're mature enough to assume, to understand that all men are created equal. With the amount of legislation that's happening today that is discriminatory, that is holding African Americans down, that's holding Asian Americans down, the hatred that is an upswelling of political force in this country today is a clear indicator that not only are we not ready, we're not moving in the right direction, we're sliding backwards from where we need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something we say a lot on this episode. It feels like we're regressing.
Yeah,
and I think it is absurd to assume that the time is now is when we need to end affirmative action. If anything, we might need to go the other way with it to make it more affirmative, right? Because things seem to be only getting worse, and that's going to be a common theme here. We also have the opposing view, and this is from Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She said that the court subverts the constitutional guarantee of equal protection by further entrenching racial inequality in education, the very foundation of our democratic government and pluralistic society. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's first black female justice, also chimed in saying, with Let Them Eat Cake obliviousness today, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. Sorry. When you're quoting Supreme Court justices, they're much smarter than I am. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life, which is exactly what we just talked about. Just because you say it's that idea of like a post-racial America, right? Like we elected Obama, racism's over. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
And that is clearly being reflected here as well.
Yeah, no, and the problem that we run into here is that what the majority are arguing here is they're arguing the point of a fiction, that in a perfect world, we shouldn't need this legislation. And they're right. In a perfect world, we shouldn't. The world we live in is far from perfect.
Yeah.
And this happened to be a stopgap measure to make things better. Nothing else has happened in this world to make that situation better. Mm-hmm. If anything, that situation's gotten worse. So by taking away some of the safeties that you've had in place to try to provide legal protections for people, you're doing your part. You're being part of the problem, not part of the solution at that point.
Yeah, why did they do this? just to have a rule? Like, what was the motivation behind it? I don't even like.
Well, the motivation is what motivates conservatives to want to do things like this.
Yeah, I guess just further the agenda, right?
Right. They're pushing an agenda, which they shouldn't be pushing an agenda. They should be looking at each and every case on a standalone basis and making educated, objective decisions. They should not be influenced by party politics, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I wonder if we'd have as harsh criticism if it was the other side, right? But I also think the liberal agenda or Democratic agenda is not as aggressive as the conservative agenda, and not as
which by its definition doesn't make sense.
Right.
That your conservatives are the more aggressive.
And that you're supposed to not like big government, right?
Exactly.
And this is the opposite of that. This is the biggest government.
Well, you could argue that this is a limitation of government because it's government making impositions over the schools. And they're saying, well, government shouldn't do that anymore. The schools need to regulate themselves.
I more so meant the 6-3 majority basically being able to do whatever it wants without being stopped.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think
I see what you mean though.
the motivation that they have at this point in time is, we're a progressive Supreme Court now. We're going to do things right the way that we see it. We're going to make the changes that should have been made years ago, and they're going to undo what's being undone. And there's a couple of problems with that. One, you're undoing existing precedent. So by every time you undo a precedent, like they did in the last session when they overruled Roe versus Wade, every time you overrule a Supreme Court precedent, you delegitimize the Supreme Court.
Nope.
The whole point of the Supreme Court
It's the word. It's final.
is it's supreme.
Right.
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 So when the Supreme Court can override the Supreme Court, then what the Supreme Court today, who's overriding that, says can be overridden.
Who watches the Watchmen?
Right. So they're delegitimizing the Supreme Court. So that's probably one of the biggest problems that you run into. The other problem is the things that haven't been ruled on, that really are important stuff that need to be ruled on, are being pushed to the side so that they can use this agenda that they have to rewrite the rules that have already been written. So you're hurting the country. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
And you talk about the correcting itself. So the Supreme Court overriding itself. It's like it really does. I didn't even think about that until just now. It really does have a very harmful effect because that basically could eliminate precedent in general. Because
Absolutely.
if they rule on now and then in 10 years there's different judges and they just are like, no, that's not. We're just gonna get rid of that. It's like, well, then what was even the point of doing it in the first place? It's like it's all temporary until you have a majority the other way that comes in and just does everything the other way. It does really delegitimize the whole process.
And that's what we've seen with political parties as well. One political party will come in and they'll be in power for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever, they control a legislative and executive, and they'll push their agenda. And the other side will fight them tooth and nail. Then they'll switch powers and the balance changes. And then the other guys are fighting and nothing gets done. Nothing substantial gets done. We don't get universal health care. We don't get tax reform. We don't get any of the things that the country needs because they spend all the time fighting. Now, we expect that from our politicians. We don't expect that from our Supreme Court. We deserve better from our Supreme Court because these are appointed positions. They don't have to campaign. They don't have to get elected. They're not chosen by the people. They're handpicked, they're cherry-picked by the president, and it's for life. And they need to be held. They're not even held to the same standards, the same moral and ethical standards that lower courts are held to. There's no ethical board that oversees the Supreme Court. You would think instead of being the exception to the rule, the Supreme Court should be the precedent to the
example.
rule. They should be the ones that are under the most scrutiny. Their taxes should be looked at on a regular basis. Their gifts that they receive, their rulings everything should be looked at. Their political affiliations, the friends that they take their vacation trips with, all of that stuff should be gone over with a fine-tooth comb on a constant basis because of the position they're in and the power that they possess.
Yeah.
It's dangerous that it's not. And it's dangerous that these people can possess more power than the elected officials in this country. That's really where the problem is. And it has a broader impact. This recent decision is likely to cause ripples throughout the country. And not just in higher education, but in selective primary and secondary schools. Ultimately, effects will be felt in every aspect of the nation's economic, educational, and social life. From the Rooney Rule that requires a minority applicant to be considered in all NFL coaching hiring decisions, to employment and promotion decisions, the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools and workplaces, and much more. The Supreme Court literally just said discrimination is legal.
Yeah.
That's what this decision says. And that is exceedingly dangerous for this country.
And I really think it is naive too, because how are you able to exist, especially as a Supreme Court justice, where you've been dealing with law your entire life? Surely you'd be able to see that people are not treated equally, right? these things, if you let things run themselves, they will not run well, right? Like, it's not going to just fix itself. It's not going to be equal if you let people do it, because like we talked about at the top of this break, affirmative action was put in the first place because it wasn't equal. So it's like, do you think that's just going to magically fix itself, especially now when, hate crimes are on the rise and discrimination's worse than it has been in a very long time? And, but then again, maybe that's all part of the plan.
Well, and I'll be the first one to say, I watched the hearings when Clarence Thomas was up for Supreme Court nominations, and the questions that he was asked and how racially biased the people that were questioning him from the other side were, and that was Democrats questioning him at the time. It was brutal. And that was a small fraction of what he's had to put up with his whole life. Because he's a man who has set precedent his entire life with his career being African American, doing the things he did. You would think going through that and then making the statements that he said on this ruling, they were coming from two completely different people.
Yeah, like how do you even believe that when he says that?
Right.
Like,
it's astonishing what he's saying now and what he's been through in his life.
Yeah.
So
and that was point number 1.
Yeah.
We've got 2 more to do.
That was rough. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something that might be a little closer to you, and that is the student loan forgiveness plan being rejected. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are continuing our discussion on the Supreme Court's recent rulings. So in this segment, we're going to talk about the rejection of the student loan forgiveness plan. The Supreme Court effectively killed President Joe Biden's $400 billion plan to cancel or reduce federal student loan debts for millions of Americans. The 6-3 decision, we've heard that number a lot, with conservative justices in the majority, said the Biden administration overstepped its authority with the plan, and it left borrowers on the hook for repayments that are expected to resume in the fall. The court held that the administration needed Congress's endorsement before undertaking so costly a program. The majority rejected arguments that a bipartisan 2003 law dealing with national emergencies, known as the HEROES Act, gave Biden the power he claimed.
The president said he would work toward a new path for student debt relief using the Higher Education Act, which he called, quote, the best path that remains to provide as many borrowers as possible with debt relief. He also moved to create a, quote, on-ramp that would help ease the risk of default for students who fail to make payments when the current pause ends. Biden blamed Republican officials. Again, it's always the other guy's fault. Biden blamed Republican officials for causing the dispute that led to Friday's ruling, saying, quote, they had no problem with billions in pandemic relief loans to businesses, and those loans were forgiven. But when it came to providing relief for millions of hardworking Americans, they did everything in their power to stop it.
That's actually a pretty good quote from Biden.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't get a lot of those.
I'm sure it was written and somebody else wrote it.
Loan repayments will resume in October. Can't wait for that. Although interest will begin accruing in September. The interest is where they get you, by the way. The Education Department has announced payments have been on hold since the start of the coronavirus pandemic more than 3 years ago. Oh my God, where does the time go? The forgiveness program would have canceled $10,000 in student loan debt for those making less than $125,000 or households with less than $250,000 in income. 26 million people had applied for relief, including me, and 43 million would have been eligible, maybe me, the administration said. The cost was estimated at $400 billion over 30 years. Yeah, this is a heartbreaker. Let's really hoping this will go through. Obviously, I'm biased. I have student loan debt. And this $10,000 would have been a decent chunk of my loans that would have really helped me out. Now, I understand. I hear the argument, right? People are saying, well, you have to work to pay off your loans. But if you go watch, and I don't remember what episode it was, the episode where we talked about student debt, we talk about how the cost of college has gone up astronomically. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, you have to work harder, right? And this usually comes from the older generation of telling people my age, well, you just have to work hard. You have to, you need to stop buying your avocado toast so you can afford to buy a house one day, when it's really not that simple. Especially when interest, like I mentioned, the interest is where they're going to get you, because as the interest compounds and compounds on itself, I've heard so many stories of people that have been paying their loans for like 30 years and they still owe more than when they started because of the interest.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is another one of those situations where the proposed solution is treating the symptoms, not the problem. I totally agree that $10,000 off your loan would be really nice. But the problem isn't how much you borrowed. The problem is how student loans are structured. And in the episode that we had talked about student loan, the fact that it's predatory, number one, where these banks are coming after students knowing what the cost of college is and the potential for getting paid back over time, the banks are willing to wait for it, especially when they know they're going to take your debt and they're going to sell it to other companies and make money that way. And then these companies that sell it then get investors to invest in it. And the last thing these investors want you to do is pay your loan off. Yep. What they want you to do is keep paying your interest, because that's how they get their money. The problem isn't necessarily students that borrow money to go to college. Part of the problem definitely is the cost of college, which has gone up unjustifiably. The other problem is these aren't traditional loans. These are credit cards, basically. If you went out and you bought a house, say you bought a house, we'll just use round numbers. You bought a house for $100,000 and you get 10% interest, which is like credit card interest on a house, by the way. But we're just doing it to illustrate.
Economics are hard.
So at the end of 30 years, you would have paid $10,000 in interest on that house. So your house would have cost you $110,000. That's it. The amount of interest that you're going to pay on that house is calculated the day that you get your loan. And it's a fixed amount. They amortize it over the course of the loan. And for the first 15 years, the majority of what you pay is going towards interest on that house, so the bank gets their money back. The bank is guaranteed to get their money back. After 15 years, the majority of the money is principal on the loan until you pay the loan off. By the time you get to the last 5 years on the loan, you're paying almost nothing in interest because the interest has already been paid back. But it's a fixed amount. If they structured student loans the same way, rather than charging you compound interest like a credit card, this problem would go away tomorrow. You would take out a $100,000 loan from the bank for your student loans. You'd pay your 10%, and the most you'd ever pay is $10,000 on that loan under that situation. And the problem of never-ending payments doesn't come into play. The problem of paying $100,000 more than the $100,000 that you were charged for your education goes out the window. That's what they should be concentrating on. They shouldn't be concentrating on trying to give you $10,000 towards your loan. That's not going to solve the problem. Because the problem is you owe that money to somebody, so the government's going to give you forgiveness. Well, the government has to pay that somewhere. So where's the government? The government's not a for-profit organization, right? They don't sell, lemonade. They don't have a lemonade stand somewhere where they're making money. The money comes from the taxpayers.
Right.
So their entire income is us. So if you're not paying your loan, someone's paying it, and it's the rest of the American taxpayer. And that's why it's very difficult to convince somebody who doesn't have student debt to pay for somebody who has student debt. What they should be doing is they should be changing the way the student loans are structured. They should be capping the interest payments on there. They should be capping how opportunistic these loans are.
And how easy they are to get.
Yes. If you did that, you could solve this problem. Until then, you're shining a turd here trying to make something pretty out of it.
Now, I will put on my tinfoil hat here. You mentioned that this really isn't fixing anything. But for people like me that are important for a Democratic president that may be running for re-election soon, this would be a great reason to get a vote for him, right?
Well, you are. And that's a good point. So he's buying your vote. That's really what this is. The problem is that the demographic that you are, the number of participating voters in that demographic are disproportionately smaller than the number of senior citizen voters, the ones who are going to be on the hook for paying that back. So that logic is valid, but the practice itself doesn't work because the numbers don't work out.
Yeah.
Because if you could get more people your age to get out and vote, it would work. But we can't. You know, the voting percentage of people in your demographic is like 15% or something like that.
I guarantee it's going to be even lower.
Right. Where the voting percentage of people 65 and older is like 70%. So that's not going to work out in your favor, even if he is trying to buy your vote.
Yeah, you're not buying enough of the vote.
Right.
He should he should make it like an elder care bill or something.
Right. But if you fix the problem and you fixed how student loans were financed, it would work for because it won't cost the government anything at that point. You simply write legislation that says how you have to conduct your loans, and you then enforce that legislation. And people who don't abide by that legislation, you impose a fine on them, and the government has another source of income without paying for loans.
So why do we think what's stopping them from doing this restructuring? It seems pretty simple.
It is, but the problem is you have to get both parties to agree to it. And they can't agree to the color of the sky at this point.
Yeah, especially even if they want to, because it's from the other side, they're not going to do it.
Exactly. Joe Biden could propose legislation that would solve world peace and guarantee food on the table for every human being on the planet, and the Republicans would oppose it because a Democrat proposed it.
And they'd call it woke too, probably.
Right. And it's not our responsibility to create world peace. You'd get stupid arguments like that.
Yeah.
When it's like, why can't these idiots just do what's right for the country and what's right for the citizens? They can't, because if it makes the other guy look good, then in turn, it makes them look bad.
Right. When in reality, it doesn't. It's we should all be in this together. We all live here.
Right.
But
I mean, you look at the parties now going into the primary, both parties are tearing at each other's throat, telling you why you shouldn't vote for the other guy of their own party.
Which is contributing to voter apathy, which is why people don't want to vote.
Exactly.
We'll make this another episode maybe, but I was always of the mind that you should always vote no matter what. And I'm really being convinced, maybe not. I don't know who we're going to have in the presidential election coming up, but it's going to be tough for me to pick somebody, right? And I know, we go with the old lesser two evil arguments, but they're both pretty bad, or they both probably will be pretty bad. And I don't know, like I said, we can make another episode, but it's the first time in my life since I've been able to vote, this will be my 5th year, because I'm 23, I guess 24 by then, or 5. But yeah, it's really a struggle. It's difficult. And I understand that voting is important and that you should always vote. But on the other hand, it's I feel responsible for who I vote for. And
that's the thing. Most voters go out there. So there's a large chunk of voter that votes along party lines because their parents did, and they'll never change. And they're kind of locked in. There's a certain percentage of those. Then there's the kind of people who are easily swayed, the kind of people who hear one argument, don't do any research, and go do their thing. They're the uninformed voter. Then there's the informed voter. They're probably the smallest percentage out there. They're the ones the politicians are terrified of. Because if you're smart enough to go out and do your own research from multiple sources and draw your own conclusions, you terrify politicians. They want mindless lemmings out there that they can tell you who to vote for, and you'll just go do it. And if you vote along party lines, you're the ideal candidate. They don't have to say anything. They could go out there and kill people in the streets, and you'll still vote for them.
Yep.
That's what they hope for. And if you're informed, and the one thing that we try to do on all of our podcasts is to educate and inform people, enlighten people. Don't listen to what I'm telling you. Don't listen to what we say on the show. Go do your own research.
Yep.
If I'm wrong, come back and tell me that I'm wrong about something. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm willing to have my point of view changed if it's legitimate. But don't just vote. The politicians go out there, oh, you have to vote. It's important. Go vote.
They guilt you. No.
Right. But, as a citizen, it's your job that's the one duty that you have is to vote. But what they're really saying is vote for me.
Right.
And voting is important because it's the only way that our kind of government continues to exist. So I totally advocate people vote. But when you're voting, if you're voting in your local election or your school board or something like that, understand the choice that you make affects you. You may not think who's in Congress affects you, but I'll guarantee you it does, because the amount of money you pay in taxes and the amount of money they take out of your pocket is something you can control by who you vote for. And if you vote somebody in this time and they don't do what you want, or you don't think that by the end of their term you're better off, or if you are worse off, vote the next guy in. And then vote the next guy in. Keep doing that until you teach them that you're in charge. The first thing the politician wants to do when they get into office is get reelected. That's their number one priority. It's not you. It's not their constituents. It's not the people that contribute to them. It's to get reelected. And they're never going to vote term limits on themselves. The highest office in the land has term limits. Politicians, Congress, Senate, they'll never do that. We have the power to do that. If you don't let incumbents get reelected, you're imposing term limits. And even if the guy gets in and you like him, vote him out. And vote the next guy out. And vote the next guy out. Don't let him get entrenched. Don't let him get in there. Don't let him create a power base or start to influence things or anything. That you've got people now, and I'm going off topic obviously here, but it's important to discuss. You had Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell gets up there the other day and does a presser, and something in his brain hits pause right in the middle of it. Now, I'm not saying this to be mean or facetious or anything. It was very clear the man had some kind of health issue at that moment. But they walked him off the stage and brought him back a little bit later after they did whatever they had to do to fix the wiring there so he could finish what he was saying, so he could pretend like he was still okay. And that was just so they could keep power. That's what they're doing. They did the same thing the same day Dianne Feinstein.
Was that where they told her to just say aye?
Just say aye.
Yeah.
Because she was completely oblivious as to what was going on because she was so far gone.
We see it with Biden all the time, too.
Yeah. And, this isn't a crack on old people or mental illness or anything like that. But there comes a point when you're no longer effective at your job.
Right.
And when you get to that point, I used to unload tractor trailers for a living. And when I hurt my back, I couldn't do that anymore. So I knew I had to change careers. I had to go do something else that was not impactful to that. And I did. Had I kept doing it, I wouldn't be able to do my job and I'd get fired. You can't allow people to stay in power who can't do the job.
And unloading tractor trailers is much lower stakes than running the country.
That's true. That is true.
And that's the part that scares me is like you have these people that may not, and it's okay. When people get to a certain age, you might not be all there.
Absolutely.
But that you shouldn't also still have the same amount of power as you did when you were fully lucid.
Right. They talk about Reagan when he was in office, where he started having onsets of Alzheimer's. And do you really want someone who's suffering from a disease like that to have his finger on the nuclear button?
Yep.
Like, you have to do what is right. You have to have some moral sense of right and wrong to put your foot down in these times, or at least have the gumption and the class to step away and say, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm not up to it anymore. I can't do it the way that it needs to be done. Let a younger person come in and do this type of stuff. We as the voter have the power to do that.
The more you know.
Anyway, that's it for my soapbox for there. We're going to run over time here, but that's okay. We're going to come back with our last segment here and talk about religion Free speech and gay rights. That should be a quick one. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are still covering the Supreme Court's recent decisions after a brief aside.
Sidebar into politics.
Yeah, but we're back, and this is our last point for today. Religion, free speech, and gay rights. That's a lot, but we're going to do our best. The 6-3 decision, which turned on the court's interpretation of the First Amendment, appeared to suggest that the rights of LGBTQ people are on more vulnerable legal footing, particularly when they're at odds with claims of religious freedom. The ruling was the court's latest in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. The Supreme Court sided on Friday with a web designer, recently. The Supreme Court sided recently with a web designer in Colorado who said she had a First Amendment right to refuse to design wedding websites for same-sex couples despite a state law that forbids discrimination against gay people.
Justice Neil Gorsuch. Is that Gorsuch?
I have no idea.
I'm not very good
Neil.
with names. Neil. Justice Neil.
I'm sure he loves to be called that.
Writing for the majority in a 6-3 vote, said the First Amendment protected the designer, Lorie Smith, from being compelled to express views she opposed. Quote, 100 years ago, Miss Smith might have furnished her services using pen and paper. Those services are no less protected speech today because they're conveyed with a voice that resonates further than it could from any soapbox.
Yeah, I read this. I was reading the show notes before the show. What? I don't understand what that means. Like, what is he saying?
Basically, he's saying that because it's something that's being done on the internet and has a wider reach, it's no different than if it was a printed material.
Okay, gotcha.
The case, though framed as a clash between free speech and gay rights, was the latest in a series of decisions in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. At the same time, the ruling limited the ability of governments to enforce anti-discrimination laws. The justices split, surprisingly, along ideological lines, and the two sides appeared to talk past each other, kind of like politicians tend to do. The majority saw the decision as a victory that safeguarded the First Amendment right of artists to express themselves. The liberal justices viewed it as something else entirely, a dispute that threatened societal protections for gay rights and rolled back some recent progress. This also comes at a time when transgender people are facing increased discrimination at the local and national level, with the American Civil Liberties Union stating that there are currently 492 bills in the works around the country that would directly harm transgender individuals.
And this goes back to what we're talking about with this backsliding that we're feeling, right? This is another example of that. Using the Constitution as the weapon. In an impassioned dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that the outcome signaled a return to a time when people of color and other minority groups faced open discrimination. It was the second time this week that the justice summarized her dissent from the bench, a rare move that signals deep disagreement. Appearing dismayed, Justice Sotomayor spoke for more than 20 minutes. Quote, "This case cannot be understood outside of the context in which it arises. In that context, the outcome is even more distressing. The LGBT rights movement has made historic strides, and I am proud of the role this court recently played in that history. Today, however, we are taking steps backwards." A Colorado law forbids discrimination against gay people by businesses open to the public, as well as statements announcing such discrimination. Ms. Smith, the woman who owned the website, who has said that her Christian faith requires her to turn away same-sex couples seeking website design services. I'm sure that's probably in the Bible. Jesus probably has a Squarespace page. Seeking website design services has not yet begun her wedding business, nor has she posted a proposed statement on her current website about her policy and beliefs for fear, she has said, of running afoul of the law. So she sued to challenge it, saying it violated her rights to free speech and the free exercise of religion.
So you jumped on my point too quickly there. So, okay, first of all, there's nothing in the Bible that is anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, nothing like that. There are no teachings.
There's not? I thought there was.
Nothing.
I'm not even joking. I legitimately thought there was about like
not
men.
a single mention.
Oh.
There are stories about same-sex. There are instances of it occurring in there. Nothing is ever preached against. In fact, if you go by the teachings of Jesus, Jesus says to love all men, to love all people. So there's nothing in there. How the court could even use that as an excuse, number one. Number two, I'll guarantee you there's nothing about websites in the Bible, okay? Maybe the new King Charles Bible there might be, but there's nothing in the King James Bible or before it that has anything to do with it. So that's a falsehood.
And that makes sense why Justice Neal had that quote that he had, because you have to frame it so it's legitimate.
Right.
And not a bunch of baloney.
So, and the other problem that I have here is she's not being forced to express opinions that are contrary to her beliefs. She's being contracted to produce a website for someone else. If she didn't like fur coats and she made a website for someone